for your patience. Thank you, and I am very honored to be here. I thank you on behalf of the National Council of Teachers of Mathematics for being invited to be a part of this momentous occasion. As you've already pointed out, this is truly an unprecedented time with the pandemic, and many across the world have experienced many of the same challenges. And so what I've been asked to do is to come and share with you some of our challenges and how we've met some of those in thinking about virtual learning environments, and particularly focusing on the teaching and learning of mathematics. I would also like to thank Dr. Sumardiano and Rahma also for helping me out, and also for being allowed to be a part of the opening ceremony. I appreciate all of the welcomes that were given and the support across many of the Asian countries. And so I really appreciate that. You have a wonderful opportunity with so many people, speakers, and then with the idea of YouTube, where you've got thousands of teachers who are also participating. And I commend you for doing that. And again, for allowing me to be a part of this and the National Council of Teachers of Mathematics. I also enjoyed the opening part when you shared about some of the work that SEAQiM, I believe, I'm sorry if I mispronounce it, but that you're doing, because you're doing things with lesson study and technology and teaching and learning and STEM. And these are all things that we have in common, because they're things that we do as well across this world, and trying to improve and support our teachers in the teaching of mathematics. So let's see if I can make my screen move. So what I want to share with you today is to share a little bit about the idea behind some of the initiatives that we've been doing. And so there are three that I want to share with you. One of them is a result of a back to school task force that we had. A second one is called Moving Forward, Mathematics Learning in the Era of COVID. And then I want to share with you about catalyzing change itself. And these three initiatives are things that have helped us to think about what we should be doing as we move forward, not only just in mathematics education in general, but also specifically during this pandemic. And particularly, I want to share some examples of some effective practice that some of our classroom teachers have been sharing using a digital environment. And then we'll close with some things about questions and challenges we still have. But I also love the idea that was shared earlier, is that we also have opportunities in order to address the teaching and learning of mathematics. So the first I want to share is the Back to School Task Force. And this particular group was gathered when we knew that when we would return after our summer break, teachers and administrators, countries, our state would have to make decisions about how teaching and learning of mathematics would take place upon returning, whether it be in person, whether it would still be completely virtual, or if there would be hybrid. And addressing some of the situations of where people do not have access to the kinds of technology that was needed in order to do the kind of instruction we wanted. So we had four groups that gathered. We had a group that gathered, and they dealt with four areas. One is to help the classroom teacher. The second was to help mathematics leaders who help make decisions. The third was building and district administrators. And then the fourth was families and how to support them. You will also notice that if you click on this particular, you'll be the particular PowerPoint will be shared with you, and you'll be able to access the resources. And I'll also put them in the chat box when we return as well. But this particular resource is one that's available on the website at NCTM. The first one that I want to share with you in particular is about the classroom teacher, because we wanted to talk about what are some of the aspects of teaching virtually or whatever hybrid situation you might be in. And the recommendations that we put forward were 8 of them. We wanted to make sure that we stayed with high quality mathematics instruction, whatever the environment might be. We wanted to make sure, the second one was to address student concerns and questions that they would have during this pandemic. The third is to help teachers to be advocates for themselves and for their students, because this is a very difficult time, which leads to number 4. We also thought it was important for teachers to take care of themselves. This has been a very emotional time for both students and teachers and families, and it's important that we take care of ourselves and take time for that. The 5th one had to do with being able to communicate carefully and constantly with families. This would be very important in whatever format instruction took. The last three, though, deal with what we wanted to talk about today, and that had to do with the instructional aspect of it. The first one you'll see in number 6 was we wanted to provide opportunities for students to explore the mathematics. We also wanted them to be able to utilize the 8 effective math teaching practices, which I will share with you as well. And then to cultivate this idea of formative assessment and what that might look like. So one of the things that I want to share with you is that we needed to think in terms of thinking about whether it would be face-to-face, whether it would be remote, whether there would be virtual, whether it would be television, whatever it might be. We needed to make sure that these practices translated into classroom and teaching, no matter the environment that it was. We needed to make sure that if it was a technical environment, that the technology really promoted classroom discourse. We needed to make sure that the students and the teachers had access to virtual manipulatives and resources that could be used at home. And then the fourth one, we needed to ensure that we were very strategic about how the learning environment was set up, whether it was digital or in some cases here in the United States, they are back face-to-face, but in very restrictive environments and what that might look like. So I mentioned that the key were these 8 effective teaching practices. NCTM had outlined these in 2014 in the document Principles to Action. And there are 8 of them. And you'll notice that they're goals focused on learning, implementing tasks that promote reasoning and problem solving, using and connecting mathematical representations, facilitating meaningful mathematical discourse, posing purposeful questions, building procedural fluency from conceptual understanding, supporting productive struggle in learning mathematics. And the last one is elicit and use evidence of student thinking. And we felt like all 8 of these needed to continue in whatever environment, particularly a virtual one. But again, we would have to think very carefully how you might do these. So one of the ways that we did this is we developed 100 days of professional learning. It turned out that in April, we were supposed to have a centennial celebration of NCTM. It's 100 years old this year. And when we could not have that, it had to be canceled. We took many of those sessions and we turned them into evenings of professional development. So each evening for 100 days, we've been doing professional development for our teachers. And many of them have focused on these effective teaching practices. And in particular, how teachers are actually implementing them virtually. So these are things that you have access to. And in fact, I know that some of the people who are working on this particular webinar actually have attended some of the sessions. They are free right now until mid-October. You can register for them and you can see the videos. If you are a member of NCTM, you can continue after October 15th to watch them as well. And we have found these very powerful for our teachers, and there are many, many examples of what to do with teaching and learning in a virtual environment. I wanted to share with you a little bit about these though. Some teachers, this is Zach Champagne, he shared one evening, and his was on virtual manipulatives that you might be using. And he said you really need to think about the transition to distance learning and using materials. And this would be really important, and to always keep the students in the forefront and think about how to engage them. And he also shared that even in a virtual environment, the manipulatives that are used, we needed students to have the opportunity to play with them, to understand them, to explore with them, to discover, and to learn. So Zach went on to explain about why we should continue to use manipulatives. They provide a wonderful visual representation of really deep mathematical ideas. It also allows students to make predictions or estimations when they're using these manipulatives. They assist many students in problem solving. Zach went on to share that they also encourage authentic collaboration, which has also been a challenge in these different circumstances that we've had to do. But many teachers are finding ways for students to still collaborate, and I'll share more about that later. He went on also to share that they needed to be active. Research shows that students need to be active in the learning, and the challenge is how do you do that in a virtual environment? And he reminded us that there are many online virtual manipulatives that are available. And he went on and shared much research that is about this. unlimited supply. You're not limited by the number of cubes that someone might have. You don't have to worry about distribution. You can simultaneously present figures and symbols. Cleanup, obviously, on a virtual environment is very quick. And you can really leverage technology to do things that physical manipulatives sometimes cannot do. And I've given a particular website here as well. Again, it's at NCTM, that shares many of these online resources that you might be interested in exploring later, because I know there are many teachers who are watching as well. And these are free. These are things that you can go to the website and look for. I wanted to share, though, that there's also the consideration that if you are meeting in person right now, is keeping those manipulatives safe for our students, so that they are not exposed to the virus. And that's been something that's been dealt with. Remember, I also shared that it was important that we continue with discourse. That's one of the particular effective practices. And Michelle Berry, who is a high school mathematics classroom teacher, shared one evening at one of the events about the importance of facilitating this mathematical discourse, even in a virtual environment. And she shared that it really helps to share mathematical understanding. It helps students to understand different approaches. It allows you to use many graphical analytical tools. And I noticed in the opening that you all use GeoGebra and many of the other online graphing calculators, etc. Desmos is very popular, and there's several. And we've also seen that breakout rooms are very useful in having discourse. We use particularly Zoom, like you're using here, so breakout rooms are easy to use, but there are also Google formats and other software like Seesaw and others that are available. And then the last thing that she mentioned in this particular part is, in the virtual environment, as well as in a face-to-face, it is critical to have engaging problems and tasks. Having to keep students engaged in a virtual environment where the teacher is not physically there is very important. I mentioned earlier about principles to action. And one of the things that Michelle shared is that we really needed to continue this idea of effective teaching of mathematics that shows the evidence of student thinking. And even in a virtual environment, we need to assess that. We need to think about it. We need students to share their understanding, be it in a written format, a drawing, or verbally. And this gives them the opportunity to really support and extend their learning. And this is something we share in Principles to Action. You'll notice the quote at the bottom is, each lesson needs intentional and systematic plans to get that evidence that will provide a constant stream of information about how a student is learning to reach the goal that has been established by the teacher. And she went on to recommend, just to be sure that you enable those particular kinds of tasks. Chantal is another middle school mathematics teacher, and he shared that not only do you need to have these strong tasks, but you need to make sure that they're high level and that they really reveal student thinking, because you are going to be limited on how much you can do in a virtual environment. He said that you really needed to carefully construct the questions to really draw out the specific understanding that you're looking for, the conceptual gaps that might be there, or the common errors. And this would be very important in the format. I said that I would share some of those ideas that some of the teachers have shared as well. And Sean shared a number of things. He shared that he uses Desmos. He uses what's called Jamboard, Google Slides, Google Drawing. These are just different kinds of formats that hopefully you know have had access to and had some success with. Synchronously, he talked about students being paired in the breakout rooms, sharing documents so that they can share their thinking. But even in asynchronous, because we find that some of our learning has to be done in asynchronous, even though it might be done online, you might actually they have work that they do offline, but you can still assign partners that they can work together, they can schedule time to work together, and still have those collaborative workspaces. The second initiative that I wanted to share with you is called Moving Forward. This is a document that we did in collaboration with the National Council of Supervisors of Mathematics who do leadership in mathematics education. Mona Tonshaff is the president, and she and I worked with a group to really look at this. And this document was developed just as school was closing out, in thinking it was about May, and it allowed us to think about, what do teachers need to be thinking about? What do math educators need to be thinking about? What do administrators need to be thinking about as they begin to plan to go back to school? Much like the Back to School Task Force, this particular document was a guiding document to give people ideas about the kinds of questions that you needed to ask, the kinds of resources you needed to try and access. It was not a how-to because there was no one answer for anyone, but it was a way for us to think about how we could move forward and make decisions that would impact literally thousands and thousands and thousands of students in their learning of mathematics. So in this particular document, there were 3 areas that we looked at. We looked at the structures that are in place. How can we make those equitable? We looked at teaching practices, and we looked at advocacy. And all of these were really critical in the work that we were doing. The second one is the one that I want to spend some time on. While the structures are critical and the idea of advocating and making sure that we realize that we're teaching human beings, it was also important for us to focus on teaching practices and what that might look like. So one of the things that was stressed is making sure that we deal with equitable teaching practices. We need to give attention to the social and emotional needs of students, teachers, and staffs. I mentioned this earlier. We needed to really look at what's the learning that is needed. There was a temptation here for when schools started back for the schools to start with reviewing everything again. But instead, what we recommended is that you start on grade level with what teachers need to be teaching to their students. And then as you found gaps of things that students maybe had missed out on, you could incorporate those into the work that you were doing. We needed to make sure that we understood the prior knowledge that students needed for a particular concept that was selected, and find ways to find out what students know. And notice that it was about what students know, not about what they don't know. This was really critical because remember, students were going through so many traumatic things that it was important to figure out what they've been doing and what they do know. And then we needed to think about intentionally thinking about ways to assess our students that were not stressful, but would help us to figure out what our students knew. Again, we focused on those 8 mathematical teaching practices and really sought out ways for them to think about what do these look like in a virtual environment. So we asked the question, what should we consider when making these decisions about professional learning and collaboration? Because teachers were going to be called on to do so many things. And I'm sure it's the same case with your teachers. They are being asked to do so many things. We have teachers here in the United States that are teaching virtually, but at the same time, they have students who are in class with them. So they're actually doing both at the same time. And it's very, very stressful. It's a lot of work, and it takes a tremendous commitment on the part of our teachers. And I have to tell you that they're living up to that. They've been amazing. But we needed to make sure that people in the decision-making area needed to remember that they needed support. They needed opportunities for professional learning, to learn how to use the technology in this kind of environment. This was new for many of them. And how could they do it so that it was effective? We needed them to make decisions about how do you prioritize time. In many of our US schools, there is not time during the day for planning, and yet the teachers are being asked to collaboratively plan across grade levels and within grade levels in this very unique situation. And so they needed to find ways to support teachers to do that. And then the third one, in response to this question, is to really look at the tools, the technology. It was mentioned before, there are many of our students who do not have access to the technology. They either don't have the bandwidth or they don't have the actual technological device. And how are we going to deal with that? And what decisions would be made in order to help make the learning of mathematics powerful for each and every student? We also recommended that we approach this through a strengths-based approach. As again, I mentioned earlier, not looking at the negative about what students don't know, looking at a deficit, but instead look at the strengths that the students bring to the classroom and build on those. We did want to reiterate that we needed rigorous and engaging instruction to support each and every student. And we need this in order to continue to build the positive identity and disposition of our students. We need to make sure that those students are students who are seeing themselves in the realm of doing mathematics and empowered to do the mathematics. You'll notice on the next bullet, it talks about ensuring that we're increasing, not decreasing opportunities. We've already noted that there are many people who did not have access to the kinds of technology that we really hoped everyone would. And this actually decreases opportunities. But what we needed to look for is ways to increase those opportunities in the decisions that we were making. And then the last one on here is to make sure that communication is open. We needed to make sure that we communicated with the parents, families, and the community, because we are indeed all in this together. So the last initiative that I wanted to share was our Catalyzing Change initiative. And in this particular initiative, I wanted to share with you that it started actually in 2018, which was pre-pandemic. So in 2018, we released a document called Catalyzing Change in High School Mathematics. And in that document, we shared particular recommendations about where high school mathematics needed to be going in the next few years. And the idea was to begin critical conversations to move mathematics in that direction. In 2019, we gathered together 2 writing teams to actually also look at, if this is what you want to do at high school, then what do we need to be doing in early childhood and elementary, and then in middle school? And so 2 writing teams actually wrote those 2 books as well. And so what I want to share with you is one of the things that happened is this document came out during the pandemic. And we thought about, well, how does this help us in the initial part of pandemic? These were written for long-term changes. But what we realized is that many of the decisions that were being made now during this pandemic were the very things that we were asking people to think about in this catalyzing change environment. And if you're interested, you can go to nctm.org/change and you can see aspects of the documents themselves. There were 4 recommendations. One of them was around broadening the purposes of learning mathematics. So we needed to really think about, why do we study mathematics? And how do we go about doing that to empower our students? The second recommendation was about creating equitable structures in mathematics. We looked at things within the United States that we have issues with, where students are tracked. They are ability grouped in such ways that all of them do not receive the same rigorous, high quality instruction. So we needed to look at those things. The third recommendation has to do with those effective, equitable mathematics teaching practices that I've talked about, and I'm going to talk about them just a little bit more as well. And then the fourth recommendation goes back to this developing a really deep mathematical understanding. And what does this mean in early childhood? What does it mean in elementary grades? What does it mean in middle school grades? And what does it mean in high school? What is the kind of deep mathematics that we need to be addressing? So I want to share with you, I realize this is probably not readable, it's very small, but it is a document that is being shared with you as a handout. And this particular document proposes those 4 recommendations across all the grade levels, and it actually shares with you across the grade levels what that might look like. So in the broadening purposes of learning mathematics, it's each and every child in the early childhood to develop math understanding as confident and capable learners, understand and critique the world through mathematics, and experience the wonder, joy, and beauty of mathematics. In middle school, it's very similar. It has the same kind of developing deep mathematical understanding, critiquing the world through mathematics, and really experiencing that wonder, joy, and beauty so that it contributes to the positive identity of all of our students. And then the high school, just to give you an example, is that each and every student should learn these essential concepts in order to expand their professional opportunities, prepared for the future in STEM, for example, and to really understand and critique their world again. And my favorite is the experiencing the wonder, joy, and beauty of mathematics. And we do this across all 4 of the recommendations. And so you'll see the similarities, but each one of the books goes into details about this, what this looks like at their particular grade level. So I want to also go on to share with you in this particular one is to share with you a little bit more about the equitable mathematics teaching instruction. One of the things that we wanted to share is that the quality of mathematics learning experiences needed to be valued rather than quantity. And you know that in this virtual type environment, it takes more time to do things. It takes longer. There are technical difficulties, just as I experienced when I started. There are things that happen. And so the quantity is not the focus. Instead, we need to identify some really quality learning experiences for our students. The second one is that mathematics is seen as a collaborative endeavor. It's not just the classroom teacher. It is also the students. It's also the families. It's also the math leaders that we have, math teacher education, administrators. We're all in this together to really help with the equitable mathematics instruction. The third is that students need to be asked to solve problems in more than one way. And this can be done in a virtual environment as well, so that value is given to each student and that voice is given to them. And then that leads to the last one, is they really need to be able to share their thinking, not just the solution. Solutions are important, but they are not the only thing we're looking at, because the students are learning. And again, you'll see the graphic, that we want to make sure that we're helping students to develop a positive mathematical identity, a strong sense of agency in mathematics, and that they see themselves as authoritative in knowing mathematics, so that they see themselves as knowers and doers and thinkers of mathematics. And we need to continue this even in these unprecedented times, whatever the environment might be. So if you are interested in more detail about catalyzing change, we did do 3 recordings of webinars around these. There's one that's an overview, and then there's one that's on the early childhood and elementary, and one on middle school. And again, this is part of that 100 days that we did in order to share with people literally all over the world. We've had people, I noticed, not Indonesia, Singapore, etc. Many of the countries have attended these, and they've been a part of it. But if you are interested in more about the catalyzing change, you certainly could go back and listen to these as well. I also wanted to share with you this idea of virtual. You asked me to share with you what are some things we're doing to support our teachers and what kinds of strategies and things that they use. One of the other things that we're doing is we have a conference coming up this fall, and November the 11th through the 14th. It will be virtual. This particular conference, though, they will be sharing ways of accessing mathematics in a virtual environment as well. We will have teachers that are sharing about this. We will have people who are sharing about different kinds of technology. And we will also have people who are sharing their experiences about how this has worked and the challenges that we've had as well. Because in this, we have had both challenges and successes that we have encountered. And it's those challenges, as mentioned earlier, having access to internet connections that are reliable. This has been a real challenge. And we have been working with our government, as I know that you all have been working as well, is trying to make sure that everyone has the access they need. Here in the state that I'm in Texas, I still have students who do not have internet access, and they do not have the technology to do this. And so teachers have had to work on ways in order to get the work through to the families in order to do with their students. I will also tell you we have this challenge. Some families have multiple students in their homes, and may only have one device. And so everybody can't be on at the same time. And so this has been a challenge as well. And so teachers have been working with this to make sure students have ways of doing mathematics and powerful mathematics, whether they have the internet connection all the time and whether they can actually do it live or not. The second one is making sure that we have those kinds of tools, whether it's a computer, a smart pad, or a phone. And if they don't, then we need to find ways to get those in their hands. I mentioned earlier another challenge that we've been trying to meet is this teacher training. We've done it through the 100 days and other types of support. Many districts have been offering professional development to their teachers about how to work with the technology and how do you promote this. We have some teachers who use technology all the time, and then others, this is new for them. The fourth one, the social and emotional support. We often try to remind everyone that this is a very stressful situation. And so we need to give each other some space and grace and understanding in this environment. And then the last one is we really need to think about what are the key mathematical topics that we need to address, because time is very precious in this particular kind of environment. It's always precious in learning, but in this particular environment, we probably cannot do as much as we've done in the past. So we need to think about what are the key concepts that we need to study. But we also know that there are many opportunities. This has been a beautiful opportunity to build the mathematics community. I know you're probably seeing the same thing. We are actually having teachers communicating. They're building networks in order to work together so that they don't feel like they're by themselves. We see this in the 100 days webinars that we've been doing. Hundreds have come together in the evenings each day in order to be a part of these. And they are building community and learning from each other and understanding that they are not alone in this. It has connected math teachers. This challenge, this pandemic has done that as well. It has also made us all think about the resources that need to be made available. And more school districts here are making them available to our teachers. We also have companies that are making them available and giving free things so that they have access right now. Another opportunity is learning about the supports that we have. I think people are trying to be much more supportive and trying to help one another. And then the last one that I wanted to do is that we have the opportunity to really study the idea of effective teaching practices in order to get at the mathematics that the students need. And I think we have an opportunity to support our teachers in doing this. They are the key to it, and they are powerful. And I am proud to know that I was one of those teachers. I taught high school for a very long time, but in no way have I had to address the challenges that they are having to do now. So as a reminder, I talk a lot in my presidency about this being a journey. I've always felt like teaching was a journey. And in particular, we are on this journey together. And I'm so grateful that I'm not alone in it, that we are here in this together. So again, I want to thank you. I have shared a little bit about the Back to School Task Force work and the effective mathematical teaching practices there. I shared with you about moving forward and decisions that we had to make and are continuing to make and guidelines for that. And the third is this idea of catalyzing change and how we can think about change for the future. What are good practices that we are learning now that we will continue to be able to use in the future? So I'm finished a little early, I do believe, but I wanted to make sure that I had plenty of time for questions that you may have. And thank you again for this opportunity.